She wanted to tell her story, so she wrote her first book, My Only Sunshine, which is a story for domestic abuse survivors that's loosely based on her life. Since then, she has written 3 more books with 2 more on the way. How did she get here? Did she think this is where her journey would have led her as an author? Join me as I talk to the incredible Shannon Jump on this episode of True Crime and Authors.
Welcome to True Crime and Authors Podcast, where we bring 2 passions together. The show that gives new meaning to the old adage, truth is stranger than fiction. Here's your host, David McClam.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of True Crime and Authors. Of course, I am your man, David McClam. If you have not done so already, be sure to follow us on all social medias. You can find those links down in the show notes. So let's get started with our author for this episode. So the author I have for you today, according to her, she is an avid reader and writer. She has a passion for storytelling and often writes across genres. She refuses to start the day without the perfect cup of coffee. She is a diehard Minnesota Twins baseball fan and a Food Network junkie. She lives in small town Minnesota with her husband and 2 teenage kids, and her debut novel, which was My Only Sunshine, was released on February 25th, 2021. She's penned her first short story at the age of 12 and still has the original copy, cover art included. Writing and storytelling has been her passion for as long as she can remember. And if you follow her on Instagram, you will see that she's still just as excited about reading as she is about writing. In addition to all of that, writing and publishing independently, she is an active bookstagrammer and NetGalley reviewer. You can follow her book reviews and publishing journey on Goodreads and Instagram. She is the author of My Only Sunshine, Even Though It's Breaking, Wouldn't You Love to Love Her series book 1, and Like a Bird in Flight series book 2. Wouldn't You Love to Love Her and Like a Bird is part of her Crimes of Passion trilogy. Please welcome to the show, Shannon Jump. Shannon, how are you today?
Hello. I'm great. How are you, David?
I am awesome. Well, first of all, thank you for being on the show. It is an honor and a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you for having me.
So before we start, as you probably already know, I know she's listening with bated ears. So Kristen, she also known as Catch Creation 614 on Instagram. She's also the official sponsor of this show because she runs an awesome digital journaling for book readers. Everybody else was the one who told me to reach out to you now ahead of time beforehand, and she was right. You came on the show, so I owe it all to Kristen.
Yay, Kristen. Love her. She's the best.
So right now, up under your belt, you have 4 books.
I do.
We're going to talk a little bit about here in a minute the one that I'm currently reading, which is Wouldn't You Love to Love Her, which is the first book in your psychological kind of Crimes of Passion thriller series. So 4 books. How you feeling about that? My Only Sunshine is your first one. How do you feel like that went?
Good. I think 4 books under my belt, and I think every release gets better than the last. I'm starting to feel like I've got my wings and I know what I'm doing a little bit. Only took 4 books, but I'm starting to get there. It's been really fun. Sometimes tough to juggle Bookstagram and the author life, but it's good. I've met some really great people, Kristen included. So it's great.
Bookstagram is definitely a very friendly atmosphere.
It is.
And I was overwhelmed when I started the Bookstagram because my daughter's like, you got to have a Bookstagram. I'm like, I don't know. She goes, they're friendly. And then all of these authors show up. And I will say that you guys are very selfless over there because with all the work you guys do, that you guys are still posting things about your books and you really appreciate the people reading your content.
We do. And we need you guys, So it's fun to be a part of the community with you and not just kind of sitting on the sidelines. And I think that's what makes it worth kind of that added, extra effort of like going above and beyond. And I'm not just promoting my books, I'm promoting books for other authors as well. And specifically when I can, indie authors, because just like you, I'm trying to spread the word for all these great authors out there that people may not be familiar with. And, but yeah, it's really great. I've made a lot of friends through the community.
Now you write across genres. From what I'm currently reading right now, how do you keep everything together and different?
Yeah, I think for me as a reader, I have always enjoyed multiple genres. I love, going from a thriller into a romance series or, from a psychological suspense type novel into maybe a nonfiction here and there. So for me personally, I think writing across genres just kind of happens naturally because of the fact that I read across genres. And same with, TV, movies, all that kind of stuff. I don't really have just one lane that I'm interested in. So as a writer, it's a great opportunity to kind of muddle it all together. And writing in the psychological thriller genre specifically, you can pull from all those different genres, still have a psychological thriller, but you can have, the romance elements in there. You can have the thrill, you can have the mind game kind of stuff. You get those unreliable narrators, the morally gray characters. And it tends to make for a very interesting read. So that's kind of, why I ended up down that avenue. Is just as a reader, I tried to ask myself, what do I enjoy reading? And that comes out in my writing.
So the interesting question I have for you is there's another author I follow. Her name is Darby Kane. She writes psychological thrillers, but she also writes romance and romance thrillers, but she's up underneath her real name. Is there a reason why you didn't choose to separate to a pen name for your thriller side versus romance side?
Yeah, I love that question. Actually, I grew up as a writer and a reader, and I remember thinking, as young as like 11 or 12, gosh, it'd be really cool to have my name on the cover of a book one day. And for me, when it came time to ask myself that question of, how I wanted to publish, did I want to be a traditionally published writer? Did I want to indie? I wasn't sure what path to take, but I knew that my first book, My Only Sunshine, was loosely based on my life. It is contemporary women's fiction, so it doesn't really align with the other 3 books that I have out and others that I'm working on. But for me, that kind of had to be the first book. I had to close that chapter of my life before I could move on to the next one. So, I kind of had it in my head of like, well, it sounds difficult to maintain multiple social media accounts, different names and things like that. So for me, it just kind of made sense because even though these books kind of cross genres, it's still me coming out. It's my creation, it's my worlds, it's my characters, and you'll see snippets of me in every book, because of that. So for me, it just made sense to maintain just one name, one reader following, because I kind of had in my head too that I like to read across multiple genres. You can't tell me there's not a bunch of other readers out there that do as well. So in my mind, I thought, well, the right readers are going to follow. So it just made sense for me.
I kind of like that because I think it benefits us as readers and fans too. And I mean that by saying this, I was not a thriller person at all. Darby Kane was probably the first thriller book that I read, and that was because I was on a book subscription service, and she was a new author. And my daughter's like, let's buddy read this. And then Kristen brought in Sarah Ennis into the group, and I'm like, all right, these thrillers are pretty good. But then if I already know you, so I don't read romance books, but because I've read Shannon Jump's thriller books and I love those, okay, maybe I'll go ahead and read that because I know who you are. So keeping that same name together, I think, makes us say, okay, well, she wrote this book is good. I know her. Let's read this book.
Well, and I love that mindset too, because I also do, I've made friends with a lot of authors as well. Some are indie, some are traditionally published. And I actually know authors out there that did publish under multiple pen names, maybe even never their own true name, right? They might have multiple pen names out there, but they've got multiple books under multiple names. And everyone that I've spoken to has said, I wish I didn't do that. So I think, you've got authors out there, to throw out a couple names, Colleen Hoover, Alessandra Torre, they're authors that are also writing across genres. And I kind of had in my head, like, if they're doing it, why can't I do it? And, that's one of the things with indie publishing too, is that you have that creative, hat that you get to wear. And you get to choose your path, and not every author's path is going to be the same. So for me, kind of right out the gate, I just said, no, I'm just going to do whatever I feel like is right for me as an author. And I've been fortunate that readers have followed. And, I haven't set out to, write the next great American romance novel, but I throw those romance elements into my thrillers too, because I think a lot of those kind of characters, like if you think of true crime specifically, a lot of, those perpetrators, they have sexual deviance and things like that. So sometimes the romance elements come into play naturally, and, you can mix those genres very easily that way.
So I've kind of asked this of all the authors, is that why you've chosen to stay independent? Because when I read these books, my first thought is there is not a publishing house that would not like to have this book. Bestsellers is going to come out of a lot of these. Is that why you chose to stay independent, though? Because you have free reign to be able to do what you want to do with your book without being censored?
Yeah, I don't know if that's for sure. Look, I'm not against traditional publishing. I can't say that if a great offer came across my desk that I wouldn't take it. But I think for me right now at this point in my career, I'm still early on. My first novel came out like a year and a half ago. But for me at this point in my career, this is a part-time gig. I actually have a full-time job outside of this. So it's, it gives me that creative freedom, but it also gives me a very flexible schedule. So for me right now, this is kind of what works. And again, I do like the ability to be able to say, I'm going to write whatever I want. No one's going to tell me how to write it, what to change, when I can publish it, all of that kind of stuff. So indie just makes sense for at least these novels and these projects that I have going, but it doesn't mean that I'm against, looking into a traditionally published deal at some point down the road. But for now, this is the lane I'm in.
So that kind of brings me to the book I'm currently reading, Wouldn't You Love to Love Her? That book is just, it's in your face. So
it's in your face.
Alicia, who's the main character in this book, from the first page, she's just there, right?
Yes.
There's like no introduction. There's no, let me put some sugar coat on this. She just comes off flat. Hey, man, look, I was a stripper. This is my problem. I'm in jail because they think I killed my husband. You either gonna like me or you ain't. That's basically how it was.
Yes.
How did you come with that? They always say that a little bit of a character is in an author's pen. Do you see yourself in her at all, a little bit somewhere down the line?
I mean, I've heard that so many times, and I have to say, I do believe that. I think as writers, a little bit of our true selves comes out in every single character, every single plot line that we write. But I also think, you called out the fact that she was a stripper. She's a sex worker. She works in kind of the online virtual, in part of the industry as a cam girl. And there's such a stigma with any type of sex worker, right? I mean, we automatically look at them and start judging, and we have our own personal thoughts about their career choice and why is that person like that. And I think, for me, it was even eye-opening writing it and having a better understanding of someone who works in that industry. And maybe I won't judge them as much as I did before this story came to life. But Alicia's character in general, I feel like she, is an extension of me in the fact that she wants to speak her mind. She is who she is. She doesn't care if you like her or not. And I think every single person out there wishes they didn't care what other people think about them. So she's kind of like that, oh boy, I hope I could be like her one day kind of way, where you want to be able to genuinely be yourself. And that's exactly who this character is. And she's not afraid to admit that.
Well, and it also tackles real life things, right? So, 2020 pandemic hits, sex work became huge, right? Especially with, again, OnlyFans. OnlyFans was originally meant for people like myself and for you, creators to go on and create extra content, extra books and things like that.
Yeah.
And then it turned into this huge platform from other things. And then you also deal with being a sex addict. And I feel like that's pushed down and shamed just like mental illness is. It is a very real topic. What made you want to write about that topic when it deals with Alicia?
Yeah, I think, that topic in general, sex addiction, I totally agree. It has that same stigma with it. There's that negative connotation. But I think our world today, right, we're trying to be more verbal about mental health. We're trying to be more aware of it. We're trying to, talk about it more. And I think, the sex addiction piece goes right in line with that. And kind of in my mind, I think, back to actually my first book that I wrote, My Only Sunshine, where I went through a very abusive relationship in my life. And I chose to turn that into a fiction novel because for me, it was the safest way to tell a story, right? But I have sexual abuse in my past. I was in a very violent relationship, and I had thoughts similar to Alicia about, oh boy, am I being too promiscuous right now? Or what am I doing? Or things like that. And I think, that part of her character is, it stems from my own personal experiences of, like just in general, like how you get out of that relationship and what you do after. Not to say I was ever a cam girl, because I did not go down that road, no stripping, nothing. But I think you have those thoughts in your mind, where you focus your energy on the wrong things, and sex can often be one of those things. So I think her character and choosing to kind of bring that in as her background, she also comes from domestic violence and child abuse, where she had a very, very bad relationship with her mother. And there's drugs and alcohol involved in that relationship as well. So again, it's kind of tying into past life experiences for me and what I may have gone through in that relationship. I think it's important to write about. I think it's important to talk about. So you will see similar themes come out in all of my books, because that's that passion. That's how you get that story where you get to the end and you go, "Whoo, I felt that," because it's stemming from something true.
Well, I feel you on that. That's why I do a lot of things I do. I am also a product of abusive relationships. My father was very abusive. In a previous marriage, I was abused. I know people say, "Oh, guys, big as you can't be," but it is true. It can happen, especially if you're a man that was raised that you just don't strike a woman back. And
Absolutely.
A lot of women take advantage of that. So I feel you on that. That's why we as creatives, we do these kind of things. I've never shied away from putting it out there about myself, because the way I feel is maybe somebody hearing me say that who's too afraid to take hold of their own life, say, well, if he's done it, he has a national type of voice, maybe I can get through it too. So I applaud you for that. That
Thank
does bring
you.
me to My Only Sunshine a little bit. So I know it's loosely based off of you, the relationship you said that you had. What made you want to sit down and write that particular book, knowing that it dealt with you in some very dark times?
Yeah, for me, writing has always been the strongest form of therapy. And, when the pandemic hit, everybody's locked in their house, right? I mean, you're looking for things to do, you're bored, you're, trying to find ways to fill this sudden time that you have. And for me, it was dusting off that manuscript and grabbing it and reading through it and saying, maybe it's time to finally publish my book. I had started it roughly 13 years before I actually published it. And when I sat down to do it, then came all the research, right? That's when I started my Bookstagram account. I started actually leaving reviews on books. I had never done that before. And I started to kind of look at the reading experience from the eyes of an author and not just as a reader. But for me, writing this book, it was the question of how much do I sugarcoat? How much is going to be fiction versus loosely based off of the truth? I knew I wanted it to be fiction. I didn't want the 100% true story from my perspective to be out there. So, fiction made sense to me. It also gave me the creative freedom to play with it a little bit. You can add color just for the purpose of entertainment, so to speak, right? It's hard to call it entertainment when you're talking about domestic violence, but, that's what fiction is, right? So, for me, it just made sense to tell the story the way I told it. I approached family members and close friends ahead of time. They knew it was coming. They were all actually very excited to read it. I got tearful phone calls and lots of hugs and all that kind of stuff. But, I constantly have to go back and say, you guys, it's fiction. I'm not saying every single word in there is true. Every single event is not true. But every single chapter is loosely based on something that happened. So yeah, it was, for me, this weight lifted off my shoulders, being able to complete that story, especially a project I started 13 years earlier, finally being able to bring it to life. And then from there, everything just kind of spiraled where, I started getting a little bit of a following and people started asking, hey, when's your next book coming out? And I'm like, oh, I didn't know I was writing another one, but okay.
Well, that kind of brings me to this, because you said something that a while ago I did a shoot with Nicole Wilden, who's the author of Obedience, and she told me that it took her 11 years before it hit daylight. Her life too, if you listen to that episode, same thing, right? Because the main character, Emma, in that book is an occultic family, doesn't know that she's in a cult. Turns out Nicole considers herself being raised in a cult, right? So that's where this book comes from. 11 years, though, to think about that. In your case, 13. What's that process like? Why does it take you so long? Is it revisions, or is it because you don't know exactly how to word it? What takes you that many years?
Yeah, I think, in my situation, I wouldn't say it was 13 years straight. It was 13 years on and off. From the time I wrote those first words to when I slapped the cover on that baby and put it up for sale. I had a very minor portion of the book done early on. And again, just for therapeutic purposes, it was coming out of that relationship and trying to figure out who the heck I was after that and what I wanted to do with my life. And then I had 2 young kids on top of it, and I was a single mother. So yeah, there wasn't a lot of time to write, but I would get snippets down here or there, or I would write out like, oh, I really want to make sure that, I write down something about this event that occurred. I also had journals at the time. I was pretty big on journaling through those experiences. So I had those to refer back to when I sat down to seriously write it. But I think the longest part of the process was actually after I decided, oh, I'm going to write this book. And it was, writing it out and making it into a relatable story for other readers or into a full, end-to-end fiction novel. But then incorporating certain events that for me had happened so many years ago that I didn't really want to go back and talk about, but for the purpose of the book, I had to refer to them. So it was very difficult writing some of those scenes that for me, I'd gotten over and I didn't want to go that into detail about. So a lot of those ones are more fictional than they are based on reality, because that was the easier way for me to pull the book together and tell that part of the story. So yeah, and not 13 years straight, but certainly 13 years thinking about it and the possibility of it and what it could mean. And I think, again, with how, society is trying to talk about mental health more, I think domestic violence needs to be spoken about more. And that was, for me, a really good way to say, hey, I hear you, I'm with you. And, there's support out there. And sometimes we can find support in ways that we didn't expect. And that could be a novel.
So, in Wouldn't You Love to Love Her, in Alicia's case, she starts out, I'm not going to give everything away because I want you guys to go read this book, but she starts out in prison. Allegedly, she's murdered her husband.
Yes, she has.
And then she goes into, let me go from the beginning. And then that beginning is when she says, hey, I'm a sex worker, I'm a sex addict. The way it seems like is that maybe she has been accused of this automatically because of that stigma. Is that how you wanted that to feel?
Yeah, sure. I think, when I started writing that book, actually, I didn't even know, like, if I wanted her to have killed her husband or not. I just, I kind of started out and, I had that prologue that you're referring to where she's already in prison. That was the very first scene that I ever wrote for that book. It just had kind of randomly come to me in a dream. But then it was, you're backtracking like, well, how did she get there and why? And, I had all these kind of ideas brewing about who she was as a person. And then I felt, well, let's put her in the sex work industry because that's just going to make people hate her again right off the bat. So I wanted her to be as unlikable as possible on paper. And there have been a lot of readers that have come out in the end and said, I found myself really caring about Alicia. And, I think that is the epitome of a psychological thriller, because you are not supposed to like this character, but there's something there that makes you want to hold their hand and walk them through life.
Here at True Crime and Authors, I read a lot of books. Every author that you've heard me interview and everyone that you will hear me interview, I've either read one of their books or I'm in the process of reading one. So how do I keep up with all of the books that I read? Well, that is where the show's sponsor, Catch Creations 614, comes into play. Catch Creations makes digital handmade planners and journals, and for those who want something on paper, printables as well. She can make anything from My Little Pony to Black Panther, anything that you can creatively think of, Catch Creations 614 can get it done. With excellent customer service and excellent communication, the owner, Kristen, will make sure that your journal comes out right and perfect the first time. And for those who are listeners of this show, you will get a special 10% discount when you use the code TrueCrime10. Catch Creations, best handmade planners, journals, and printables in the business. Check it out now. And I'm glad you wrote the prologue that way, because that's actually what hooked me in the book.
Awesome.
Right. It's kind of like watching like Law and Order. Law and Order always starts out right. You see the person walking down, and then they get killed, and then you have to watch the whole rest of the hour to find out what happened. I
love how they do that.
This is how your book is, because you're like, wait a minute, she's already in jail. She's accused of this. What happened? So you're not going to find out till you get to the end of the book, which your writing style is very good to make you want to continue to turn the pages.
Thank you.
And then you also wrote that in POV. What made you decide to write that way? Because you are the second author that I've read that does POV that actually does it very well. I do not like POV books because a lot of people, they can't keep things straight. But you're the second author I've read that does it very well. So what made you want to write in POV, and how do you keep all that straight?
Oh, I appreciate that. So for me personally, sometimes I struggle with reading third person narratives. Sometimes to me, it feels like I'm very separate from the story. And I think writing in first person, and actually parts of this series are like second person, where the reader or the narrator is talking to the reader. You will see the word you, like she's physically talking to you as the reader. And a lot of readers have said, wow, I literally felt like I was in it. I was involved. I was there. I was, part of just a sit down conversation, having a drink with this person, and she's telling me the story. And for me, those are the best way for me to tell the story, because the best way for me to write it is to get directly into that character's head. And the only way for me to do that properly is to write it from their point of view. I also am a huge fan of dual narratives. I think it helps break up any mundane parts of a book where, you, especially if you don't like that main character, right? So, you've got these morally gray characters, a lot of the, you're going to hate to love me or love to hate me kind of people. And having multiple point of views, multiple narrators helps break that up. So it gives the reader somebody else to root for if they don't care for person number one.
So Wouldn't You Love to Love Her is one of what's going to be 3 books
Correct.
in this Crimes of Passion trilogy. Are you automatically thinking of the next book while you're still completing the first one?
So when I started writing Wouldn't You Love to Love Her, which is book 1, I did not have a series in mind. It was going to be a standalone novel. But then as it started coming together, there were elements of it that I really felt would do well with at least a second book. But then in addition to that, the first ARC readers coming in saying, when do I get another book? That kind of stuff. It was like, okay, fine, I'll do it. I have said from day one that I'm not a series writer. I am a standalone author. And here I am, just put out book 2 of this series. But that's what the readers wanted. And I absolutely love that they wanted that for these characters, because there is a lot more story behind them. So yeah, when I made that decision, as soon as I sent book 1 off to the editor, I started working on book 2. That started coming together a lot faster than I expected it to, because I thought, how am I going to do this? I'm a standalone author. I can't do it. But it came together like magic. So with this one, with book 2, just coming out last week, was it last week? I think it was last week.
It was last week. Yeah.
When book 2 came out, I was kind of taking notes as I was writing that book, about things I wanted to include for sure in book 3, but even the plot line for book 3, I was like, I have no idea what I'm going to do. But it's really started coming together. I've had some discussions with some of my beta readers. They're really more like alpha readers because they give me feedback as I write, which is super helpful. Helps me get a feel for if we're off to a good start and where to kind of go from there based on their feedback. But yeah, it's, book 3, I've got a lot of notes. I've got some stuff down and it's like rapid fire trying to get this one done.
So book 3 is going to be called Who Will Her Lover Be?
Who Will Be Her Lover? Yep.
Who Will Be Her Lover? So I messed up the title already.
That's okay.
Who Will Be Her Lover? Wouldn't You Love to Love Her and Like a Bird in Flight is 2 different characters.
Yes.
I'm assuming that would it be a different character too for Who Will Be Her Lover?
So book 3 will actually see a culmination of the narrators from the first 2 books coming together to tell a story for book 3.
That was my next question, which with any of them cross.
Yes.
So you answered that for me already.
Yes. So you'll see the 2 main narrators from books 1 and 2 are going to tell the story for book 3. So we'll all come together.
So when are we looking for book 3?
So book 3 is tentatively scheduled for November 15th of this year. I say tentatively because I actually have to have surgery also that same month. So I'm trying to get everything done and out the door before I go under the knife. But yeah, it's, I kind of said starting out when I made the announcement that it would be a series, I wanted to rapid release. I wanted the whole series to be complete within a year. I personally, as a reader, hate waiting for the next book in a series to come out, and I'm well aware that my readers do too. So I will openly admit I left book 2 on a little bit of a cliffhanger, but it tees up book 3 so perfectly that I couldn't help it. But yeah, so November 15th is the target release date for the final book in this series.
Well, that's a sign of a great author because I have authors like that too. I get on Bookstagram like, hey man, look, when the next book come out, can I get an arc? Because I can't wait to read this.
You want it like 6 months early when those arcs come out.
Right. And it's because you guys leave us in such a state of, that's it. This is where you're going to leave me and I got to wait 12 months to get another book. It's just like, yeah. So I understand that sometimes as readers, we can be pushy, but that's just because you guys' content is very, very
well,
good.
And that's what every author loves to hear, right? I mean, your excitement about our books coming out is what helps motivate us. It's the wind beneath our sails to write that next book. And, for this series specifically, I mean, again, the series has really played out quickly in my mind. I mean, if you think about releasing 3 books in a year, that's pretty darn fast. But that kind of ties back to what we talked about earlier with indie publishing and the creative freedom that you get with that, and makes it possible. I'm not necessarily fighting against a specific word count or, certain content that has to be part of it. My truth be told, book 2 ended up 10,000 words shorter than I wanted it to be. But to me, the story was done. It was complete. It felt right. So I put it out that way. So, it helps to be able to make those decisions on your own.
So you said that you work full time.
I do.
You're a wife. You're a mother of 2 teenagers. How do you find time to write these books?
Well, I mean, my teenagers are like hardly ever home anymore. So that kind of helps. I've got one that'll be 18 in a couple months and another that'll be 16 in a couple months. So they're very busy lives on their own. And one of them has a job and all that kind of stuff too. So my husband loves to watch TV. So usually I will bring the laptop and a pair of headphones and I'll work, sit next to him or on the other couch in the same room, or I lock myself in my office if I'm on a deadline, stuff like that. But I think, I firmly believe that we make time for the things we want to do, the things that are important to us. And for me, reading, writing, those things are very important to me. So I guess the time just comes to me out of nowhere.
Well, it's also good if you have a supportive family behind you, which it appears that you
Absolutely.
do. Same here. I work full time. This is my passion to do this podcast, to bring authors out and to talk about true crime. So I like to do. And my family's very supportive of that in my time in which I have to do those things. So I totally appreciate that.
Oh, I love to hear that. And it's, it's true what they say too, where if you love what you do, it doesn't feel like a job. So for me, I've heard lots of authors give advice of, make sure you write every day, no matter what, write every day. For me, I don't actually do that. I can go a month without writing a single word because then it feels like a job if I have to do it, So I'm fortunate enough that, I've been with the company I work for actually 15 years this month. So I do have, a schedule that makes it a little bit easier to work with. I worked from home even before the pandemic. So it makes it easier. I log in, do my hours, my 7 to 3, and by 3:30, I'm rolling over to the laptop, waiting for the husband to come home, the kids to come back, dinner, all that kind of stuff. So, I find the gaps where I can. It works out pretty well.
So here's a fun one. When you're writing, do you have a specific musical playlist that you'd like to listen to?
Yeah, for the most part, when I'm actually writing, I don't listen to music, even though I'm a singer and I love music. So it's a huge part of my life, but it's very distracting for me as a writer. And I find that if I listen to music while I write, those lyrics start coming out in the books. And I'm like, nope, don't want that. But there was actually for my second novel, even though it's breaking, there's a character in there. His name is Owen, and he is a stalker. And for me, I had to put on a hat and be like, how do I pretend like I am this big burly dude and I'm a stalker and I have all these terrible thoughts? And so that character specifically, while I will totally say he's probably a culmination of every guy I dated besides my current husband, but his character required this crazy mindset to be able to write. So I did listen to Creep by Radiohead, literally on a loop every time I was writing his scenes. And it just kind of brought me into the right headspace or the right kind of mood to write his character. But that's the only character I've ever listened to music while writing.
So, well, let me tell you, I'm glad you're here today. Your books are phenomenal. I have all of them queued in my Kindle Unlimited right now, page turners. So I literally have to
love to hear that.
Force myself to put it down. My wife's like, you got other things to be doing. I'm like, all right, after this chapter. And that's 3 chapters later. So I do appreciate what you do. Happy to put the word out there for you. Is there anything in closing that you would like to say to your fans and your readers out there?
Oh gosh, just thank you. I mean, we've kind of touched on it a bit too, how it's indie authors kind of sometimes end up with this bad rap. People give the impression that we don't work as hard as some of the traditionally published authors. We just put out whatever we want, or that we were rejected by agents or other book publishers. And I think it's important to remember again that, some of us are doing this as a choice. I personally have never queried for an agent. I've never tried for a book deal, all of that kind of stuff. So for me, it's just an easier way for me to manage my life with writing. So I just openly thank anybody who is willing to pick up a book that's written and published by an indie author. Give us the time of day, give us reviews, spread the word like Kristen did by introducing you and I. It's just so greatly appreciated because I think there's so many great books out there in the indie market that deserve to be read.
This is true. And that's why I do this show. So because a lot of you guys out there are great and the word needs to be put out there. So I'm hoping that I'm doing my part of doing that.
Well, I appreciate it very much.
All right, Shannon. Well, I thank you for coming on the show today. Anytime you want to come back, maybe we have you come back again and we'll discuss your new book when it comes out in November. Always welcome here on the show.
I will happily come back.
All right. Thank you. And thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Well, that was the incredible Shannon Jump. You heard it here. Go out and pick up all her books. If you are on Kindle Unlimited, everything that she has written, you can grab right there. If not, also you can buy them right on Amazon or any other bookstore that you frequent that sells books. All right, guys, so always remember to follow us on all of our social medias. Also, everything about Shannon Jump will be in the show notes, her website, and how you can get a hold of her on social media. Be sure to check her out. I hope you guys are being safe out there. As always, be good to yourself and to each other. And this is the podcast that brings two passions into one. I'll talk to you guys next time.
Thank you for listening to True Crime and Authors. Don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe. Join us on social media. On Facebook at True Crime and Authors. On Twitter at Authors True. On YouTube and TikTok at True Crime and Authors. And email at truecrimeandauthors@gmail.com. Cover art and logo designed by Dazzling_Ray from Fiverr. Sound mixing and editing by David McClam. Intro script by Sophie Wild from Fiverr. And I'm the voice guy, your imaging guy from Fiverr. See you next time on True Crime and Authors.